Welcome back. Section 5.3 is all about proportions. So a proportion is a statement that two fractions, or this should say ratios, are equal. So in other words, if you're saying two things are proportional, it's the same as saying you have equivalent fractions. So the way we would read this, we know that A over B equals C over D. That means we have two equivalent fractions. We could also say A is to B as C is to D. So more specifically, let's look at this example. So we have 3 is to 7 as 9 is to 21. So we could write that as fractions. 3 over 7 equals 9 over 21. And you know that's true because to get from 3 to 9, we had to multiply by 3. And we did the same thing to the denominator. So these fractions represent the same equivalent fractions. They represent the same proportion of stuff, the same amount of stuff. For example, if we're mixing 3 parts bleach for every 7 parts of liquid, we could mix 9 parts bleach for every 21 parts liquid, and we would have the same concentration of bleach. We would have an equivalent fraction. Once more, so we've got 5 is to 4, or sorry, 4 is to 5 as 8 is to 10. So we can write that as equivalent fractions. 4 is to 5 as 8 is to 10. All right. Sometimes we'll be writing a proportion with two rates. So similar units, you have to make sure you're consistent with your units so that they're in the numerator or in the denominator. The similar units have to stay in the numerator or stay in the denominator. So for example, if it takes 3 hours to mow 4 acres of grass, you know then it would take 6 hours to mow 8 acres. So for these equivalent fractions, we have hours in the numerator and acres in the denominator. We could have had acres in the numerator and hours in the denominator as long as we were consistent about it. So it would also be fine if you did 4 acres per 3 hours equals 8 acres for every 6 hours, as long as you are consistent with those units. All right. So here they're asking us to write a proportion that is equivalent to this statement. If it takes 5 rolls of wallpaper to cover 400 square feet, it will take 7 rolls to cover 560 square feet. So pause the video and see if you can find an equivalent, an equation that would make this true. Okay, and so hopefully you had a chance to do this one on your own. So we could write 5 rolls per 400 feet squared. We do need to keep our units here. Equals 7 rolls per 560 square feet. And we'll get to examples later in the chapter where maybe one of these 3 numbers is missing. And so you'll be able to use proportions and equivalent fractions to solve for the missing value. All right. The proportion rule. So this is really a rule you might remember from what chapter was it? I think it was chapter 2 when we were looking at equivalent fractions. And so this is where you draw the X. So this is saying to test the fractions are equivalent, which is the same thing as testing if they are proportional. We take their cross product. So we draw ourselves an X. And if A times D equals B times C, then they are proportional or equivalent. Okay, so this first example, then we can do 5 times 12. And usually I do a little question mark here. I say, does that equal 6 times 10? In this case, it does. So yes, they're proportional. In this next example, then we can go 3 times 9. Does that equal 7 times 4? And we get 27 on one side and 28 on the other. So no, these are not proportional fractions. They're not proportional to one another. Okay, so let's determine whether the following are proportional. So we're going to do the cross product method here. So we're going to say, does 5 times 32 equal 8 times 20? And so 5 times 32 gives us what? So we get 160. on the left. And we will also get 160 on the right. So in this case, then, yes, they are proportional. All right, next one. So again, let's do the cross product there. So does 7 times 4 equal 9 times 3? And in this case, you'll find it doesn't. We'll get 28 on the left and 27 on the right, which are not equal to each other. And so we would say not proportional. Okay, sometimes you'll have fractions or decimals in the numerator or denominator. So let's do a few like this. So here, we're going to do the same method. We're doing a cross product here. So does 1/4 times 48, I'm going to do that 48 is 48 over 1. Remember, we can do that with any whole number. Does that equal, question mark, 8 times 3? Okay, well, 48 over 4 is what we're going to get when we multiply that together. And we can do that division, or we could divide the top and bottom by 4. And we're going to get 12 over 1, or 12. So on the left-hand side, we've got 12, which does not equal 8 times 3 because that equals 24. So here, then, the answer is not proportional. Okay, the last example has a decimal, but you're going to do it in the same way. So pause this video and see if you can use the cross product method to see if those two fractions are proportional. All right, let's try this one together. So I'm going to ask, does 0.5 or 1/2 times 80, does that equal 6 times 3? And sorry, I'm inconsistent here, but I could use the X symbol for multiplication, or I can use the brackets. Let's use brackets, I guess. So 0.5 times 80 will give us 40. And we're asking if that equals 6 times 3 is 18. So in this case, then, our fractions are not proportional.